can one person be a national hero to millions and a mass murderer to millions of others? Well, today we're going to try and make sense of one of the most consequential and definitely one of the most controversial figures of the 20th century, Mao Zedong.
This really gets to the heart of the problem, doesn't it? On one hand, you have the visionary who unified a fractured China, who pushed for literacy, who championed women's rights. He's the guy who turned China into a world power. But on the other hand, a brutal dictator whose policies led to unimaginable death and the destruction of so much history.
So how do you square that circle? Was he a savior or a monster? Well, to even begin to answer that, we have to go back, way back. Right, so let's look at the rise of the revolutionary. You'd never guess that the man who would one day completely reshape China started his life in 1893 as the son of a fairly well-off peasant. It's an incredible journey from there to the absolute pinnacle of power. And it was not an overnight success story. Check out this timeline. It all starts in 1921 when he helps found the Communist Party. A few years later, he's leading uprisings. But the real game changer, that was the Long March in 1934. It was a brutal, defining moment that made him the undisputed boss of the party. And from there, it's a 15-year fight to the top, until in 1949, he's finally in control of the entire country.
And this quote, wow, this tells you everything you need to know about his philosophy. And he said it way back in 1927. He's not mincing words here. He's basically saying, look, this is not going to be polite. This is going to be violent, and it has to be. It's a peek right into his mindset. And that philosophy was put to the ultimate test during the Long March. I mean, just look at those numbers. 100,000 people start this grueling year-long retreat, and fewer than 10,000 make it out alive. It was an absolute meat grinder. But for the survivors, it became this legendary story of survival against all odds. And Mao was the man who led them through it. This event, more than any other, cemented his power and created the cult of personality that would define his rule. So, the revolution is won. Now what? Well, after taking power in 1949, Mao had to actually govern the country. Winning a war is one thing, but building a nation, that's a whole different challenge. And this is where the story gets even more complicated.
And here it is, the iconic moment, October 1st, 1949. Mao stands there and announces the creation of the People's Republic of China. You have to imagine what this felt like. For millions of Chinese people, this was the end of war, the end of invasion, the end of chaos. As he put it, the Chinese people had finally stood up. And in those first few years, things actually looked pretty promising. For the first time in a long, long time, China was unified. They launched huge campaigns to teach people to read. They improved healthcare so much that life expectancy shot up. They even wiped out opium addiction, which had plagued the country for a century. It really seemed like a new, better China was on the horizon. But, and it's a huge but, that period of progress and stability, it didn't last. It gave way to some of the most radical and destructive social experiments in human history, plunging the country into absolute misery. It all kicked off with something called the Great Leap Forward. The goal was, let's just say, ambitious. Mao wanted to turn China into an industrial giant, basically overnight. He thought they could do it by getting everyone to make steel in their own backyards, and he forced all the farmers into these massive communes. The result? A catastrophe of unbelievable proportions. The focus on making useless backyard steel took farmers away from the fields, and the whole system collapsed. What followed was one of the worst famines in history. Just look at that number, 30 million people. It's a death toll that's almost impossible to wrap your head around, and it was entirely man-made. And if that wasn't bad enough, a few years later, he launched the Cultural Revolution. To reestablish his grip on power, he basically unleashed the youth of the country, telling them to destroy anything and everything connected to the old China. It was 10 years of pure chaos. Ancient temples were destroyed, millions of people were persecuted, and the entire country turned on itself. So, that brings us right back to where we started. We've seen the revolutionary who unified a nation and the dictator who unleashed hell on his own people. So how on earth do we make sense of it all? Well, let's just lay it all out side by side.
On the plus side, yes, he ended China's period of weakness, he made it a unified country, and life expectancy and literacy did go up. Those are real achievements. But the negatives, they're just staggering. A totalitarian police state, endless political persecution, cultural devastation, and a death toll in the tens of millions.
So what does the very party he created think about him today? Well, they've come up with a handy little formula. Mao, they say, was 70% correct and 30% mistaken. It's a clever way for them to acknowledge the absolute disasters he caused without tearing down the statue of their founding father.
And these two pictures, for me, really sum up the whole crazy journey. On the left, you've got this young, fiery, intense revolutionary in 1927, and on the right, he's this aging statesman shaking hands with the President of the United States, a move that changed the entire Cold War. The transformation is just immense.
So in the end, there are no easy answers here. Mao Zedong was, without a doubt, a giant of the 20th century. But his story forces us to wrestle with a really difficult question. How should we remember people who create and destroy on a scale that is almost too vast to comprehend? What's the final verdict on a legacy that contains both triumph and tragedy of that magnitude?